As globalization changed the way products were manufactured, it also changed the way products were consumed. The availability of cheap labor overseas decimated the manufacturing industries here in North America, and as clothing became cheaper to produce, the end cost to consumers also dropped. The result is an industry that is manufacturing clothing so fast that an average fast fashion retailer can offer new lines up to 18 times a year. And what about the people who are responsible for making that clothing? The life of a garment factory worker can best be described as grim. With the majority of manufacturing now occurring in countries like Bangladesh, China, and India, workers are not privy to the kind of labor protection we see here in Canada. They are paid as low as 88 cents per hour, are forced to endure shifts lasting as long as 18 hours, and many people are working in factories that are proving to be death traps, as was the case on April 23rd of 2013, when the 8-story Rana Plaza in Bangladesh collapsed, killing 1,129 people working in the 4 garment factories and injuring 2,515 more. And this is not an isolated incident. And what of the environmental impact? Textile manufacturing accounts for 25% of the world's production of chemicals. The process to dye and finish fabrics can use up to 72 different toxic chemicals in thousands of liters of water, and that chemical wastewater is flowing back into waterways untreated. China is the leading manufacturer of textiles, producing approximately 41.3 million tons of fiber each year. It also has the dubious honor of being known as one of the countries with the worst water pollution in the world. As much as 70% of its rivers, lakes, and reservoirs are polluted, 20% of that pollution coming from industrial waste runoff. And textile manufacture, although highly toxic and resource intensive, is not even the worst part of the equation.
Definitely the manufacturing of our clothing has a huge environmental impact, but actually 2/3 of the impact on the environment comes from us, the consumer. So once we purchase our clothes, how we care for our clothing, how we wash it, and then how we dispose of it actually has a greater impact over its life cycle than the actual production does.
Kelly Drennan is the founder of Fashion Takes Action, Canada's only non-profit organization devoted to promoting sustainability within the fashion industry. She says that consumers and industry are equally responsible in making the shift happen towards a more sustainable business model.
Fashion Takes Action, we've sort of taken 2 approaches to the consumer in terms of shifting that behavior. And one is talking a lot about slow fashion and something called cost per wear. If you were to take let's say a top, let's say it was $30, and that's a pretty average price for one of these fashionable tops that was made poorly, that will fall apart. So if you were to take that $30 and save it and wait a month, and that $30 a week, and then take that $120 and buy something that was made sustainably by professional tailors, like it's going to last you for maybe 5 years as opposed to maybe 5 wears. And so when you do the math, it actually ends up that the piece that cost $120 cost per wear could be a dime compared to the $30 piece that maybe was $5 a wear.
And the more poorly made clothing we consume, the quicker we are disposing of it. It has been calculated that the average North American puts 70 pounds of textiles into landfills each year.
I think when people hear the 70 pounds, they think, oh, and it's not like we're, throwing our clothes in a bag, opening up a dumpster and chucking it in. What we are doing for the most part, that does exist, but for the most part, I think that people are dropping off those bags instead at places like Goodwill and Value Village. But the reality is that not everything makes it onto the shelf in those stores. I think that the biggest culprit, though, is those bins you see in the grocery stores that have some fake charity or some, misleading sort of charitable element to it. And really, what's happening there is that clothing is just being packaged and shipped overseas. And when I say in landfill, I don't necessarily mean in North American landfill, because what happens is when those clothing gets shipped over to Africa, there's large and extra large and extra, extra large. Nobody in Africa is that big, at least not in a lot of these poor countries who are buying these clothes, and that ends up in African landfill.
FTA is also a members-based organization for retailers and designers working to increase sustainability within their business model, be it through choices of fabric, manufacturing processes, or social responsibility.
We take a very holistic approach to defining sustainability at Fashion Takes Action because there isn't one clear answer. Because the apparel industry has so many different negative impacts, and really, you could be doing one thing that addresses one problem, and that's still better than doing nothing. I don't think perfection can actually ever exist in this space. I think there are some brands who've been at this for a dozen years and are definitely leading the way, but again, they're not perfect, and I just think it's important for industry to know what their options are, and at the same time for consumers to know, what is better than what they've been buying, and how can they be smarter about what they're buying and how much they're buying.
The number of designers creating fashion using either upcycled or more eco-friendly fabrics is growing, and many of these lines can be found at Chartreuse Style, an eco-centric boutique owned by fashion designer Marianne Koala.
Well, when I first opened the boutique, or first was planning to open the boutique, I thought that I would do a lot more myself because I had a better idea of what I expected the clothing to be made from and how they were to be made. But I was pleasantly surprised that there were a fair amount of designers out there already producing nice things that are made out of organic materials and sustainable fabrics. And so it kind of changed the way I looked at opening my boutique and decided to buy more lines. And yes, as the years go by, I'm finding there's more and more people that are getting into it and realizing how to do it. And the ones that I've started with from the beginning are doing it better.
There are some changes occurring within the industry as well. New technology is being developed to produce textiles from renewable resources in closed-loop systems that don't pollute waterways. New methods of dyeing fabrics, such as air dyeing, are using 95% less water and uses 84% less greenhouse gases than traditional dyeing methods. And although it's a fraction of what it once was, there are still some manufacturing houses in Canada producing high-quality garments for local and American markets. One such company is 11th Floor Apparel.
Manufacturing facilities left, I think, in North America, so we're kind of proud to be a Canadian manufacturer, and I think that it is challenging because obviously our pricing are a little bit higher than in Asia. However, I think that the difference is the gap is narrowing a little bit. What I think in general people like Canadian manufacturing. I think Canada is still politically inoffensive, and I think I know we have high labor standards and we have high health and safety standards. So I think overall I see the upside in the long run.
Eventually, if industry across the board is adopting sustainable initiatives, sooner or later, it's going to become sort of the invisible. It'll just be sustainable. And we won't even be using terms like eco and green and sustainable because that's just how it's going to be.